Hey everybody, Jeremy here from Gnomebot Studios. Welcome to the Gnomebot Nook. Today I'll be talking about Grit Fantasy RPG. This will be episode 3 with a topic of system overview. We've got a lot to cover, so let's start. Thought I'd begin with discussing, just who this game is for and who this game is not for. So if you're somebody who really enjoys light rule systems and who, wants something that will set up quickly and play quickly and that has a good, solid rule system and good art, I think Grit Fantasy would be something that you're going to enjoy. I designed this game to really work well for the GM. So prepping games is really, really easy, especially when you're using these things called the builders, which I'll talk about later. So you can throw these games together quickly, and this system is designed specifically for one-shots, short campaigns, kind of episode-based play, and would also be good for convention-style games. It has a light footprint. It has one book that has, 138 pages. That's all you need. It has everything in there. So it travels really well. Just take with you some scatter terrain if you're traveling, and you're good to go, really. If you're somebody that's playing maybe heavier games, that like long campaigns and stuff like that, and you're just sort of like in between campaigns, and you want to run some quick games, kind of as a break, Grit would work well for you. Maybe you have a regular group and you're playing like heavier games like D&D, and perhaps you're missing some players and you just want to play anyway. You don't want to cancel the session. Grit will get to the table quickly and get you going. I also think this is really a great system for introducing new players to the tabletop RPG hobby, because the rules are so easy to learn. And the gameplay is intuitive. There's just not a lot of overhead as far as the players are concerned for work to get into the system. That also goes for playing games with kids. Actually, this really works well for kids because the rules are streamlined, kind of bare bones. They're going to pick it up easy. It has like a lighter theme to it. There's fun illustrations. The gameplay is fast. Like you can run a session in 45 minutes. Sometimes kids may not have the attention span of an adult. So, running a 45-minute to an hour-long campaign is like kind of a nice time frame. And Grit does that well. Also, the single D12 is a little bit easier to read. That's like kind of the main die that's used in the game. And there's fewer stats to kind of worry about. So there's just a lot less to keep track of for a kid. So I'd recommend that Grit for kids. And so I'm going to kind of like shift to who is Grit not for? If you're kind of see this on drive-through and you're thinking about it, here's some things that you may want to consider if you're like playing D&D and Pathfinder and you're kind of looking for some other system that's like that is that kind of level of heaviness. Grit is definitely not going to fit the bill for you. It really has very few familiar features that you're going to find in D&D and Pathfinder. Like there are no classes, there's no leveling, there's no spell system, there's no money and like shopping for equipment. So you're not going to find those things in this game, so you may be disappointed. If you're really into like combat heavy scenarios where you're getting into the minutia of measurements and components of spells and like all these different microscopic rules that kind of feed into a long, drawn-out combat scenario, Grit definitely won't be for you. If you're like into collecting like a mass series of books just to play the base game, like I know some people just like to have a nice shelf of books. But if you're looking for that, you're not going to find that in Grit, because Grit is a single book and it has everything in it. Core rules, making characters, GM section, monster section, and a big loot section. That's not to say that I'm not going to produce more books, but that will be more different settings, and I do plan on doing that. So it's a single book, travels well, so if you want that big shelf of books, not going to happen with Grit. If you're also someone who really enjoys prefabricated adventures and materials that are already made up for you for your campaigns, again, that's not happening in Grit. Grit is like a more do-it-yourself kind of system. I've set up things to make prepping the games easy and on your terms. You're the one making up the adventures and the scenarios. And again, it's for one-shots, short campaigns, and convention play. So you're not going to find these long-term campaign books with Grit. It's just not part of what this system does well. Not that you can't make that work, but, it's not designed for that. So that's just kind of an overview on who's it for, who's it not for. Just wanted to put that out there in case you're looking at this book. So I'm kind of just going to scroll through and go in the order as far as, kind of doing the overview here of the book and what this is about. I'm just going to scroll through and just go through the book here. So if you go on to DriveThruRPG, there's going to be, a few pages that are available to look at for you. So the first couple of pages is basically going to show you, basic structure of Grit and what you kind of need. So as with most rules light systems, it's obviously easy to learn. You can make characters quickly. The combat is fast. You have lots of loot, but the loot is actually very minimally written as far as the rules are concerned for them. They're not more than 2 lines each of rules, and that's 6x9 size lines. And again, low prep, so easy for the GM to get stuff rolling for it. If the thing that you're going to need for this is obviously the book or the PDF, you're going to need at least 2 players with one person like being the GM. You're going to need a set of polyhedral dice, D4 through D20. You're going to need some character sheets, some pens and pencils, and then, just a good imagination. So that's really all you need to bring to the table. And this book, actually, once you learn the core rules, you're not going to need to access the book a lot, especially as a player. As the GM, obviously, you're going to be dipping into that for game prep and stuff like that, or looking up monsters. But yeah, for players, you're not going to need to read this a lot once you get the kind of core set up in your mind. So the game revolves around a standard D12 die. That's like the primary die. You're going to use that to make pretty much all the rolls in the game. You also have another set of secondary dice that are called focus dice. These are a D4, D6, and D8. Those are used to just boost rolls whenever you need them. So you would roll, the standard D12, add your, what's called an aspect, which is your stats. And then if you want to boost that roll, you can choose one of these focus dice and roll it with that, after you've rolled the D12 and add it together. Boom, you've got a big number, hopefully. Those focus dice go away once you use them. They're replenished the next session, basically. Or if you have enough rest kind of in between your adventure stuff. Every character has 10 points of grit. That does not change. There's no additional grit points. Grit is actually hit points, which is health. So, there's not this power bloat that happens like you see in some games. And then as far as, items are concerned, there's no spells in this book, but there's like just a ton of magical items that have special abilities. So I've kind of gotten around the spells by putting in just a lot of loot that have cool properties that you can use. So the core rules are, when you're making a roll, which is like whenever your character is trying to do something in the game, you declare an objective. The GM tells you what kind of roll it is. It can be static, which is rolling against a static target number. And those only are 4 of those, which is easy, 3, average, 6, hard, 9, and absurd, 12. So you have to beat those numbers, or beat the target number that's selected by the GM to make that thing happen that you're rolling for. Once that static number is set, then you roll against it, add your aspect value, and you're good. There's also an opposed roll that happens if you're like fighting against an opponent or doing something that's opposed by some opponent of some kind. So in that case, you just roll against each other, add your aspect values. Whoever gets the higher one wins. If it's a tie, it's a stalemate, unless in combat you're gonna, deal 1 point of damage to each opponent. And that's pretty much it. So you have the static roll, which is just beating a target number, or you have an opposed roll, which is just rolling higher than your opponent. You take your aspect, you've got 5 of those, which is your stats. You add it to the D12 roll. Simple as, can be. If you wanted to boost the roll, you can just add a focus die, roll it, and add it to it, and then you get a result. I've got a lot of examples in the book. I think the core rules make up 14 pages. So, and like maybe half of that, or just a good portion of that is a set of examples for everything to help you out. Pretty much everything in the game happens in turns. So everyone gets a turn per round. Combat, no combat, works the same. In combat, obviously, there's going to be more opposed rolls kind of stuff happening. And I'll go over that in a few minutes. Okay, so there's movement and range, which is very simple. There's melee, short, and long. There's no exact measurement of all those things. Melee is just very close hand-to-hand combat, which encompasses, attacking with a melee weapon, brawling, claws, grappling, that sort of thing. Short range is the distance covered by running a few seconds, or the range of thrown weapons, such as darts or spears. And then long distance is just twice the distance of short, as far as a move is concerned. And then like fired weapons, such as bows or crossbows. Pretty simple. Okay, so the aspects, there's 5 of those. There's might, which is your raw physical strength. Prowess, which is your refined physical ability. Your valor, which is mental and physical resilience. Insight, which is like perception, sensory awareness, and like using gadgets and stuff. And then command, which is your social competency, acting, charm, intimidation, that kind of stuff. And also using instruments, scrolls, wands, like magical items like crystals and shards and that kind of stuff. The range is basically -2 to +3. +3 is the max. Every character has 10 gear slots. That is the maximum number that you can ever have. You are free to use everything in your inventory. There's no changing gear or anything like that. It's just all accessible. Gear info gets into like some details. All gear is going to show you what kind of aspect relates to that gear. Like a club would be a melee weapon, so it takes might. Darts take prowess, so that would be a prowess weapon, a thrown weapon. And then some items are single use, which will have just a big capital letters SU on it. So you use those, one and done. Torches, potions, food items, that kind of stuff. There are things called kits that they have a number of items in them, and they just basically give you bonuses or kind of relate to the target number in some way, like reducing it, basically, to do specific tasks, like, climbing, picking a lock, that kind of stuff. Food and potions are single-use items, obviously, that are consumed as a free action on your turn. So you could just down a potion and then start swinging your sword if you wanted to. Grit, I've said before, you have 10. Each character has 10. You only recover that between sessions or if there's a period of rest. And that's up to the GM. There's no like stopping and recovering in combat. That just doesn't happen in Grit. You can't do it. You can, however, have potions and food items and special artifacts and things that can recover Grit for you. When you die, when you reach 0 Grit, you have a choice. You can go out in a blaze of glory, which gives you just basically a massive final act of heroic deed, or at the very end of your life, basically. It's considered a natural 12. You can add a focus die on there that you don't have to roll for, just maximum value, and then once that happens, you're dead and gone. You can also choose second chance, which on the next turn you pop up with 1 Grit. However, your maximum Grit is now permanently 5. And if you take the second chance, you can't do a Blaze of Glory or second chance again if you are reduced to 0. Combat, there's like 2 pages. That's all it is. So combat just happens over a series of rounds where each combatant takes 1 turn per round, and you can spend it taking either an action or a reaction, but not both. Okay. Now the GM is part of that. They get a turn as well to, do things with all the monsters. So taking an action allows you to either make an attack, you can sprint, which means you do a double move, or you can do something miscellaneous like picking a lock, climbing, using a special gear item, that kind of thing. You also get a short move that can either happen before taking an action or after. And obviously sprint is just 2 moves together. I talked about free actions already. That's drinking a potion, consuming a piece of food, handing off a piece of gear to an ally. And then making a reaction. If you're attacked, you can counterattack back. So if you are attacked by a melee attack, you can choose to attack with melee if you have a melee weapon, or do a brawling attack against them. If you're attacked by a ranged weapon and you have a ranged weapon, you can fire back at them. You cannot use a ranged weapon against a melee attack. The range doesn't work. You have to be far enough range away. Another option is you can dodge. So if somebody attacks you, you can dodge. So if somebody swings a sword at you, you can dodge away. That's a prowess roll. If someone shoots a ranged attack against you, you can dodge. That's also a prowess roll. So if you win that opposed roll, you take no damage. Okay. You can also choose, if you want to, if you're attacked, you can choose to take the hit. What this does is creates an attack against you that is now a static roll, which is usually average. And what that does is it frees up your action. So if you had something you wanted to do in that round and you were attacked, instead of using your reaction or your turn to do a reaction, you can choose to take the hit and then free up your turn later in the round. Okay. There's also flanking, which means that if you've already attacked or you're kind of locked in melee combat with an opponent, and someone else or some other monster comes and attacks you, they get a bonus against you. So you can get teamed up on. Damage is super easy in Grit. It's basically with a static roll. It's the difference between the roll and the target number. So if the target number was 6 and you roll a 9, you deal 3 points of damage. Opposed is the same thing. Difference between the two contesting rolls. So if a 6 is rolled from the monster and you roll a 10, you deal 4 points of damage to them. There's also what's called fixed damage, and this is more about like poison and traps and that kind of stuff. But it's just basically a single value, usually between 1 and 3. So in the example in the book, poison deals 1 point of damage per round. So that's fixed damage. Straight damage could be something from like falling debris, something like that. So in the example, there's falling debris that falls on the hero. They make a prowess roll. If they miss that prowess roll, they take D6 points of damage. Simple enough for straight damage. Now, one thing that is cool that happens is you get soak. So if you're wearing armor or have a shield, you can combine their soak value, and any incoming damage, it just simply reduces that damage by that amount. So let's say you have light armor and a shield, that would be 2 soak, and you take 4 points of damage, you would only take 2. Real simple. And shields you can use to, you can actually sacrifice to just negate a complete one attack against you. In the book, there's a bunch of combat potentialities such as brawling, disarming, grappling, paired weapons, shield bashing, surprise attacks. These are all very minimally written, so there's not a lot of rules that you need to read about that. I think the maximum number is like 4 lines. Most of them are 1 or 2 lines of rules, so not a lot to keep track of there. There is no advancement in Grit Fantasy RPG. There's no leveling system, nothing. You get gear as you kind of go through your adventures. This is more narrative based, so it's more about what your characters experience and what those shared experiences are with other characters. I do have optional rules in the book that kind of go over some milestones. If you wanted to add milestones into like a short campaign, that's fine. But there's no set advancement system like D&D where there's levels and you get certain things at certain times. Just isn't part of Grit. Building a character happens in 6 steps. You pick a lineage. You have 12 choices. Each of those has a special ability. You then allocate your aspect points between your 5 aspects. You have 4 points to spend. And then you, after you spend those or allocate those, the stats or aspects that you have not allocated an aspect to or a value to, you have to allocate a -2 worth value. So you could do -2 on one stat or aspect, or -1 on 2 aspects. And this kind of gives a nice variation to the characters. Kind of a strengths and weaknesses kind of thing. Next thing is, step 3 is unique gear item. There's 20 of those, you get 1. There's also basic gear items that you select. You get 4 of those. There's 2 D20 charts of gear. Weapons, armor, special stuff. That's kind of fun. And then step 5 is just allocating your 10 points of grit, getting your focus dice in front of you, and figuring out what your soak is. And then step 6 is just name and details. Basically that's, select a name for your character and then pick a couple details out that just like kind of define your character. That can be quirks, that could be interesting things that your character wears, what they look like, where they came from, kind of what their mission is. It's up to you. But that just gives you a little bit of more rounded feel for your character. I do want to mention that I've created a quick build option for characters that allows you to roll for pretty much everything in it. You can literally make a character in 2 minutes. So very fast. Okay, and I have an example of the character sheet in the book. Give you a feel of what that looks like. Character sheets are very easy to keep track of. Like I said, it's great for kids because there's not a lot on there. That does not mean you can't have a rich, deep experience with, role-playing. Just means that you don't have a lot to look at or to keep track of what you're playing. GM's Guide is, I'm not going to go over a lot of details with that, but I have a lot of things that are advice-driven. I've got some kind of lists of things that you're going to want to keep track of. I'm not telling you how to be a GM. I'm just kind of giving you some ideas of what makes GMing easier for you, things that make GMing easier for you for running grip games, and also just some things to consider when you're setting up things and running your games. Kind of go over some examples of static and opposed roles. There's also a cool thing that I have been playing with and added to this game. It's called the Mighty D4. So it's just a binary kind of setup. You roll a D4, and 1 and 2 is either, bad stuff, or 3 and 4 is good stuff. So like if someone asks you a question in the game, you don't have to know the answer to everything. You don't have to have piles of notes explaining what things are in the game. You could just roll this Mighty D4 and come up with a quick answer on the fly. So it really frees up your headspace as a GM. You can also use the Mighty D4 to kind of set your target number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, easy, average, hard, absurd. It's a quick way to generate that. I've got notes on combat, kind of how to run things, taking your GM's turn in combat. And then it goes over monsters and NPCs and kind of their stat blocks. In Grit, stats for monsters and NPCs are different from characters. There's only 3 numbers that you have to worry about in their stat block. One is a universal aspect value. Second one is grit, the amount of grit they have. And third is the number of turns they have per round. So the universal aspect value is just one value that you roll for, or anytime you roll with that monster or NPC, you just add that aspect value. And those range from -3 to like +3 or +4. Obviously grit, there's a range between 1 and 50, but they usually go in increments of 5. So it's like 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. Turns, most of them are going to have 1, just kind of match characters, but some of them have 2 or 3. Those are the powerful ones. So that was developed definitely to make things easier for you on the GM's end of things. I've got a list of hazards and conditions such as acid, bleeding, blindness, falling objects, fear, fire, knockback, prone, suffocation, being swallowed whole, that kind of stuff. That's one page. And all of them are two lines of text. So super easy again, not a lot to learn or remember, and easy to look up if you need to. I mentioned optional rules. I've got some additional ones that I didn't mention, like dealing with critical roles, what to do if people are dawdling in the game. There's also a cool thing I added called easy mode. So if you have new players or kids, or if you just want to make things a little bit easier, I've got a list of 6 things you can just, plug into the game and just makes things a little nicer for your players. Deal with limiting PC looting, like if your character, if a character dies and then suddenly there's a new character that just starts looting the body of their old character, maybe a little imbalanced, so I got some ways to deal with that. I mentioned milestones before, playing multiple characters for one player, what you can do for rewarding awesome moves and ideas in the game. Also structures also can be, they can take damage as well. So you just apply grit to them, just like they were a character. Of course, they're not going to have aspects or anything, but, a door could have 10 grit, and it takes 10 points of damage to punch through that. Last thing in the optional rules is just like talking about the builders. So in the game, I've got several builders that I call them, and they're just a series of tables that you can use to generate ideas for your prepping your games. So the big one is the story builder. And what that does is allow you to quickly generate descriptions for plot, terrain, location, detail, and event. So you get one little, group of tags, and what that does is it sets your creativity going. So like you get just like the basic skeletal structure of a story plot, and that gives you something to go on, and it makes it so much easier to like prep quick games. The second thing is an encounter builder, which gets in a little bit more detail. It's about generating details about monsters and complications. So if you want to take the story builder and add an encounter builder roles to it, it just can give you this really nice group of ideas to work from. The other builder is the NPC builder, so you can quickly generate NPCs. The last one is the monster builder, which you can make custom monsters for, which is super cool. Then I've got a list of magic effects, or a table, D20 table. Magic effects, trap effects. Those are nice little quick things that you can add into your games. Again, easy prep stuff for a GM. I've got 3 different types of monsters. They all have the same stat blocks like I described. One is humanoid monsters, so they're basically like the villainous types. So I take the lineages that are made from or seen in characters, and then I just add a type to them. And there's 6 of those: assassin, bandit, cultist, soldier, thief, and thug. So those all have special rules and or abilities rather, and stat blocks for. Then I have common monsters and grit monsters. And those are identical mechanically speaking as far as stat blocks and stuff. They're set up the same way. But common monsters are all ones that are typically found in most RPG games, right? So there's ogres, trolls, skeletons, goblins, that kind of stuff. And then the grit monsters are all specially designed for the grit world, or there's not really world built for it, but specifically designed for grit. And there's 20 of those. Obviously, there are charts to roll randomly for those. And after the monsters section, I just have the loot, and there's just a ton of those loot items in the book. I've got 20 D20 charts or tables of loot. There's 3 main sections: gear, consumables, artifacts. Artifacts are like the magical items. So gear is just like the basic stuff: armor and weapons, kits, uncommon items, unusual objects. Consumables are like the single-use items. So you got curious goods, foodstuffs, handy devices, and magic potions. Artifacts, there are 12 different types. All of them are really cool, have all interesting abilities, and are a ramp up from basic gear. That's basically the overview of the book and the overview of the system. The core rules are really, like I said, easy to learn. There's only 14 pages in the book dedicated to the core rules, and a lot of that is examples. So you're not going to have a hard time like getting the gist of how things work off the get-go. So the GM has obviously a little bit more to consider, but still, even for the GM, there's not a lot for you to keep track of. So the whole idea was that this was going to be obviously a rules light system, and that it was going to be really easy for the GM, because I think if it's easy for the GM, players are going to have a good time playing it. So that pretty much summarizes what I wanted to talk about today. I want to dive into some of these specific things in detail in later episodes. I will probably be putting out some combat examples on a VTT to show you. So look for those. So anyway, thanks for listening in. I know this one was a little bit longer than usual, but I really appreciate you stopping by. As always, happy gaming, take care of yourselves, and roll those dice.